Hi, it's Miss Marsden. I'm going to take you through this week's lesson, which is talking about the impact on food webs. So what you need to do for this lesson is you need to have your booklet ready or a pen and paper. And you also need to have a knowledge from the previous two lessons. So if you haven't done the lesson on food chains and food webs yet, I recommend you go back to that first. So your first task is the do now task. You've got 5 questions. I'd like you to answer those 5 questions in the booklet. Again, you can do it on a piece of paper if you wish. You have, I recommend, 5 minutes to pause the video and answer the questions, and then we're going to go through them together. So, first one, naming all the predators in the food web. Remembering that a predator is anything which feeds on another animal. So you've got the fish, the seagull, leopard seal, and the blue whale. Naming the producer, it's phytoplankton. Even though phytoplankton's not a plant specifically, it does photosynthesize, so it can be a producer because it's getting its energy from the sun. 2 primary consumers, you're just looking at anything which is feeding on the producer, so zooplankton and krill. Which prey animals have more than one predator hunting them? You should have said the krill and the fish. So if I use the krill for an example, it's got 2 predators, which are the fish and the blue whale. The other prey animal that we were talking about is the fish, and that is predated by the seagull and the leopard seal as well. Describe how the fish are dependent on the phytoplankton. It's because the phytoplankton is producing oxygen from photosynthesis. That allows the fish to respire, remembering that we need glucose and oxygen for respiration. I keep using the terms photosynthesis and respiration, and you have come across these in the first topic that we did as soon as you started Year 7, which was cells. If you can't remember those 2 things, please look back on BBC Bitesize because we have done it earlier in the year. So let's move on to the new content for this lesson. What we're going to do today is we're going to describe how changes in the environment can affect different organisms. We're going to explain how a change in environment can affect the organisms within a food web. And we're also going to be introduced to a new word, which is bioaccumulation. And we're going to explain what the process of bioaccumulation is. So please make sure all distractions are out of the way. And we're going to get started. So here's another example of a food web. It's the same one we looked at in the do now task. It's just got a few more organisms interleaved into it now. But what I'm asking you to think about and to make a list of is what factors might cause the number of organisms to decline within this food web. So if I think about the number of fish, for example, what might cause the number of fish to decline? Think about what we use fish for example, and why that might cause them to decline. So just take about 2 minutes to write down as many ideas as you can about what might cause the number of each organism to decline. So what you should have been thinking about, you should have been thinking about factors like hunting by humans. You might think about potential poisons, increase in number of predators. So if I increase the number of killer whales, what will happen to the number of elephant seals, for example? What would happen to the number of penguins and the number of leopard seals because the number of killer whales have been increased? If I got rid of the seaweed, what would happen to the crabs, bearing in mind that the crabs only eat seaweed? So all of those are examples of factors which could cause the number of organisms within that food web to decline. So check how many you got, and then I want you to make a list using the model which is on the PowerPoint now to improve your list. So pollution, disease, chemicals, deforestation, for example, would be something which causes the number of organisms to decline, not necessarily in an ocean food web, but in one which you would get in a woodland or a forest environment, okay? Right then, so all of those are factors which can affect the population of individual organisms. So for example, increased hunting of the fish in the web we were looking at earlier would impact the number of predators which usually feed on that fish because they no longer have as much food. So that's just one example of how I link together these factors to the impact that they will have on the food chain and food web, sorry. All of those changes might lead to the following. It can lead to a shortage of food, loss of habitat, or a lack of partners to reproduce with. Those are the key three things that animals compete for, and that's what they need to be able to survive and thrive. Different organisms are affected by different changes in their environment, okay? So if a disease was introduced to a food web, because there's different organisms in there, all of them wouldn't be affected, for example. So different organisms are affected by different changes in their environments. So let's do some specific examples. I'm going to do one with you, and then I'm going to expect you to have a go at these on your own, okay? So we've got a panda, and the change to their environment is that humans are moving into pandas' territory, and they're chopping down bamboo. Pandas basically are quite strange in that they only have one food source, which is bamboo. So if humans have come in, they're removing that food source, how is that going to affect the organism? Obviously, what it's going to do is it's going to cause the panda to not have a food source anymore, which is sustainable. There's not going to be enough food to go around, and the pandas are going to die out. So how does that affect the panda population? It's going to cause it to decrease. So a shortage of food leads to the population decreasing because they're going to be competing for a very small amount of food. There's not going to be enough to go around. So you've got several more examples in your booklet, and what I'd like you to do is to fill in the missing spaces and complete how the changes in the environment are going to affect the organisms in the examples, okay? So pause the video for as long as you need to. I'd like you to spend about 10 minutes on this. And if there's any of them you struggle with a little bit because you don't necessarily have that knowledge about those organisms, just look them up. There's loads of information that you can find online about this. So you should have paused for about 20 minutes and you should have completed the full page. So first example is a polar bear, and there's increased temperature leading to melting of the polar ice caps. Polar bears rely on the sea ice for hunting, for resting and breeding. If that disappears, the population will decrease. So notice how I've linked it to the population of that specific organism, okay? Please do the same for the other ones. If you haven't, pause it now, improve them, link it to the population size of that specific organism. So the other two are B, increased use of insecticide. Insecticides kill insects. The population will decrease. Increased water temperature. This fish, which is a cod, thrives in cold water. So, thrives in cold water. No, it doesn't. It thrives in warmer water. So if you give it warmer water, there we go. It's going to thrive more. Population will increase. If you made the water colder, it'd be opposite. The population would decrease. So we're going to make this a little bit more complex now. If melting ice caps are causing the polar bear population to drop, what we're going to consider now is not just the population of the polar bears, but we're going to consider the population of the other organisms within this food web. So let's think about this in terms of the number of seals, walruses, squid, and both the small and large whales. So, first one, if we look at the seals, if the number of polar bears is decreasing, what's going to happen to the number of seals? Just pause it, have a think. So, the number of seals is going to increase. Why is it going to increase? It's going to increase because there's nothing eating it anymore. There's no predators of the seals anymore. Same for the walruses. Same for the squid. But what else is eating the squid? Just pause it for a second, have a think. So the small whales are eating the squid. So the squid population isn't going to increase as much as the populations of seals and walrus, but it will still increase. That's good if you're a small whale, because the small whale eat the squid. Population of large whales as well will increase. Why? There's less things eating them, but not directly necessarily. It probably wouldn't have that much of an impact, because does a polar bear actually hunt a large whale? No, it doesn't. It just eats them if they've already died, so it won't necessarily increase that much. But for the sake of this question, we'll say it will. So now you can see that actually the change in population of one organism can actually have a knock-on effect of everything within the food web. So you need to just take it one organism at a time, and then you can start describing the impact of one specific organism on everything else, okay? So, how would an increase in seal, squid, and small whale affect the population of the fish? Bearing in mind, we've said the population of seals, squid, and small whales will increase. So just pause the video for a second to think about it and to answer this question. Then I will give you the answer and you can improve it using our feedback. So, if we increase the number of seals, squid, and small whales, what that's going to do is it's going to decrease the population of fish. Why? Because there's loads more organisms, there's loads more seals, squid, and small whales that need to feed on the fish. If they need to feed on the fish, then the number of fish is going to go down really quickly. So, humans have overfished in this food web the grey mullet. The grey mullet is here. So, if humans overfish the grey mullet, so the number of grey mullet decrease, what I want you to tell me is what would happen to the population of grey mullet, what would happen to the population of bladderwrack, and what would happen to the population of the lobster. For each one, tell me why, please. Write the answers down in your booklet now. Pause the video for as long as you need to. So, I accidentally gave you the answer. I already said that the population of grey mullet would decrease because humans are overfishing them. So the bladderwrack is at the bottom. The bladderwrack is a type of seaweed that the grey mullet feeds on. If there's less grey mullet to feed on it, then the population of bladderwrack will increase. So, will the population of lobsters be affected? No, it won't. So a disease now reduces the number of lobsters. There are now 4 questions at the bottom, which I would like you to answer. In your booklets, please. So we're removing or reducing the number of lobsters. So the first one, What's going to happen to the population of the limpets? So if we reduce the lobsters, they're not eating as many limpets, so the limpets would increase. The population of common seals, which are up here. Common seal feed on lobster, so they have less lobsters to eat. Their population will decrease. What about the microscopic algae? So, what happens to the population of microscopic algae? If the lobster was feeding on it, it would increase. But actually, I'm going to disagree with this answer here, because if we think about it, we've already said the limpet numbers are going to increase. So if we've got more limpet, it's going to eat more algae. What's going to happen to the amount of algae? I'm going to say that it will decrease. So the fourth one's the most complex one. What happens to the population of grey mullet? Why? So the population of grey mullet is going to decrease. Why is that? Because the common seals don't have lobsters to eat anymore. So they're going to eat more grey mullet to get their energy, because they don't have the lobsters to feed on anymore. So improve your answers if you need to. Pause it for as long as that takes. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So we've talked about the impact of increasing and decreasing the number of organisms within a food chain. I'm going to move on to the last objective now, which is talking about something called bioaccumulation. If we just break this word down into two, bio, we know, means living. If something accumulates, it builds up. So we're talking about something building up in living things. So that's something that we're talking about in this instance are chemicals such as insecticides. So if chemicals such as insecticide, which are used in farming, enter the food chain, they can cause problems. Primary consumers that feed on the crops, which contain insecticides, end up with that toxic chemical inside of them. It's then passed along the food chain to the secondary and tertiary consumers. If we think about it like we were talking about with the pyramids of numbers, it builds up along the food chain. So for example, if we've got a ladybird will eat several leaves. A bird which feeds on that ladybird will then have to eat more than one ladybird to be able to sustain itself. So let's say a ladybird each eats 5 leaves. So that's 5. A bird then eats 5 ladybirds. So that would be 25 leaves effectively, which have been consumed by that bird. So 25 leaves worth of insecticides is built up in that secondary consumer, okay? That demonstrates how it becomes more concentrated as we go along the food chain. This process is known as bioaccumulation. And if we link that back to our definition for bioaccumulation, it is something, in this instance a chemical, which accumulates, it builds up in living things. Bioaccumulate, builds up in living things. So here's another example. If each wheat stalk has 1 unit of concentration of the insecticide, each small bird ingests 2 wheat stalks, for example. And then you can see it's becoming more concentrated along the food chain because the bird of prey at the top eats 3 small birds. You can see that each wheat stalk contains 1 unit. Each bird then eats 2 wheat stalks. And if the large bird of prey eats 3 small birds, you can see that 6 units are being ingested. So along the food chain it has built up. So you've now got questions in the booklet. You have 12 minutes to complete them. If you're struggling, rewind the video to help you out. I would recommend spending 15 minutes on these questions, so pause the video for the next 15 minutes to complete the questions. So let's mark them. So, a reason for the rhinos to decrease. They're hunted for their horns. Another word for hunted is poaching. If you get rid of the rhinos, the tree and grass population is going to increase because there's fewer rhinos consuming them. And the other answers are pretty straightforward. If you didn't get them correct, what I recommend you do is just pause the video, copy out the answers, and then rewind it and have another go at doing them independently at a later time. So writing out the food chain, remember, producer goes at the front, so phytoplankton all the way through to fish-eating birds. As you move through the food chain, the concentration of pesticide increases, it accumulates. And explain why this happens. It's basically just talking about the consumption of how many organisms at each part and how many ppm, that stands for parts per million, of the insecticide, okay? So all you need to demonstrate is that as you go along the food chain, that toxin accumulates, it becomes more concentrated. Again, pause it, copy it out if you need to, retest yourself at a later time. So there's some extension tasks in your booklets if you wish to complete them. What I need you to do this week is I need to make sure you send this booklet to your teacher. That's after you've used the mark scheme to go through your answers and you can demonstrate that you've marked your answers, okay? You need to complete your Educate quiz as well. So the league table that gets sent out is based on the most questions answered per week. If you aren't happy with your percentage and you resit the test, so you're spending more time on your assessment, then you're more likely to be at the top because you've answered more questions. If you want to set your own quiz questions on Educate, you can do as well. That means you're more likely to get to the top of the league table. Well done for completing this week's lesson.